Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into a world where silence wasn't just golden, it was glass saving. You find yourself deep inside a medieval workshop, tucked somewhere between a monastery's crumbling library and a soot-darkened alley. The air is thick with the scent of ash, melting sand, and that inexplicably medieval mixture of beeswax and something animal you'd rather not identify. A furnace glows like a dragon's belly, and all around you, glassblowers move with slow, deliberate grace, barely speaking. If at all, you hear nothing above a whisper, not even when a red-hot glob of molten glass is being spun at the end of a long iron pipe. Not even when someone burns their fingertips. Not even when a finished goblet tips off a table and shatters. There's just breathing. Careful, nasal, breath through the nose kind of breathing. If someone speaks, it's soft, right behind your ear, and never loud enough to startle the air. And this is where it gets serious. You're about to spend hours working in an environment where one stray sound, a cough, a laugh, a sharp inhale could send a shiver down the spine of a molten silica and crack it before it even cools. You probably won't survive this shift. Not emotionally. Anyway, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Medieval glassblowers loved a midnight start. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the heat of the workshop, and the first thing you learn is this. Medieval glassblowers didn't just work, they endured. Temperatures inside these small spaces could climb past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the walls often sweated with condensation, not just from fire, but from breath. So much breath. Breath was everything. Every piece of glass began with it. Every mistake ended in wasted breath. You watch a man, his cheeks puffed, his eyebrows singed, tilt back and blow into a long pipe with the precision of a flutist. His cheeks deflate slowly, like a balloon mourning its own party. At the end of the pipe, a glowing orb starts to take shape. It pulses with life, orange, then yellow, then clear. He doesn't speak. No one speaks. Not even when a nearby assistant fumbles with a tray of tongs and drops a pair onto the stone floor. The silence is tactical, deliberate. Sound, you learn, vibrates. Vibrations jostle the delicate structure of softening glass, and glass especially hot. Partially formed glass does not enjoy surprises. You crouch beside a younger apprentice whose only job right now is to breathe evenly while watching the master's back. He's allowed no questions, no exclamations, not even a startled noise if his own sleeve catches a spark. Instead, he twitches his fingers in a quiet code, learned like a secret language passed down through scorched generations. And here's where it gets weirder. According to one fringe theory dismissed by many but clung to by the whisperers, some believe that glass had memory, that it remembered trauma, that a loud noise at the wrong moment wouldn't just ruin the current project. It would taint future pieces made in the same furnace. Kind of like a ghost, but angrier and more brittle. Historians still argue whether this was true belief or just workshop superstition. Either way, it made for a very quiet workday. As the night thickens, the silence becomes more than a rule. It becomes a rhythm. You can hear your own heartbeat, matching the dull roar of the flame-fed furnace. The flicker of fire on the curved walls creates ghostly silhouettes. Figures that look more mythic than human. Someone whispers a single syllable. You can't make out the word, but it halts the room like a dropped anvil. Everyone freezes. A master nods once. A tool is swapped. The process resumes. That's how fine the margin is here. One whisper for coordination. No more. The work itself is slow, hypnotic. A glowing ball of glass becomes a jug, a goblet, a thin panel destined for a church window. There's no mass production, no machinery, just lungs, patience, and a lot of sweating. And here's your fun historical fact of the hour. Most medieval glass workshops didn't even have proper chimneys, which meant the smoke and heat had nowhere to go but into your lungs. It gave the glass a certain flavor. As one sarcastic monk supposedly wrote, or maybe he was just hallucinating from lead fumes, you step backward and nearly bump into a bucket. Inside it, cold water, and believe it or not, urine. Yep, Glassblowers sometimes use stale urine to shock cool tools. Welcome to history, where hygiene is optional and every smell tells a story. And still, no one raises their voice. Even the dogs, curled near the doorway, seem to know better than to bark. By dawn, your body feels melted. Your skin smells of salt and smoke. Your ears have adjusted to the quiet, so that even a cough feels like thunder. You've watched hours of glass being formed, spun, stretched, and snipped without a single raised voice. Because in this world, silence is both tradition and technique. And whispering careful, warm, calculated whispering might just be the oldest workplace safety policy on record. You wipe the sweat from your temple with a sleeve that's already soaked through. Stepping back toward the bins near the workshop's darker corner, they're filled with what looks like sand. No labels, of course. Just scoops and sacks and barrels with hand-carved lids. A system only the glassblowers understand. Probably because they invented it while half asleep and fully overheating. Here's the thing, no one tells you until it's far too late. Glass is made of sand. Yes, but not just any beach variety. You can scoop up while dodging jellyfish. That sand would bubble and crack and hiss like an offended teapot. Medieval glass required finely sorted silica sand, often carted in from specific riverbeds, dried painstakingly, and sifted through mesh that was on a good day made of horsehair and crossed fingers. Beside the sand bin, there's another wooden box filled with what looks like pale ash. You pinch a bit between your fingers. It's soft, warm, almost flour-like, and smells faintly of old campfire. That's plant ash specifically, the ashes of burned seaweed, bracken, or even beechwood. Not randomly tossed in, but processed in careful batches, burned in specific kilns, and left to dry for weeks. When mixed with sand, that ash acts as a flux, lowering the melting point. Because pure silica melts at a temperature rivaling the sun's bad moods, and medieval furnaces shockingly did not come with a turbo setting, there's a third bin. This one smells salty. Because it is. Salt was often used in some glass recipes as an alternative flux, though that brought its own problems. Too much and the glass turned cloudy. Too little and it turned stubborn. Get it just right and, well, you're still whispering. Because your recipe is a closely guarded family secret. But then there were the accidents. One story, half legend and half truth depending on which glassmaker you ask, tells of a village apprentice who confused soda ash with powdered donkey dung. Yes, donkey dung was sometimes involved, more on that later. The result? A furnace that sputtered, a batch that refused to melt, and a master who didn't speak to anyone for 3 days, not out of anger, but because the smell simply knocked him unconscious. Historians still argue whether that tale reflects reality or is just an old scare tactic used to scare green apprentices into paying attention. Either way, it's passed down like gospel. And speaking of gospel, there were workshops, especially near ecclesiastical sites, where monks had their own variations of ingredient rules. These rules included prayers over each ingredient before mixing, as if holy words might stabilize the glass. Some whispered psalms over the sand. Others traced crosses in the ash. A few reportedly refused to use any salt gathered on Sundays. No explanation, just vibes. And then there's the fourth bin, the one you're not supposed to touch. It contains something different, darker, almost sticky, a mixture rumored to include animal bone ash, powdered snail shells, and the dried resin of trees cut during a full moon. Nobody in the room confirms this, they just glance at it. Occasionally, like a family heirloom that keeps getting passed down because no one's brave enough to throw it out. You're now beginning to understand something vital. Medieval glass wasn't just chemistry, it was kitchen alchemy. It was myth, layered over mineral. The recipe wasn't just about getting it right. It was about avoiding getting it so wrong that a bishop came knocking. Because yes, bishops did knock, especially when the stained glass for their new cathedral window turned green instead of gold, or when the rose window cracked in its frame 3 weeks after installation. Entire glass houses have allegedly vanished overnight after botched commissions. Not went out of business, vanished. One fringe historian claims a particular abbey in southern France employed 2 traveling sand tasters who would journey to glassmakers, sample the sand like sommeliers, and declare if it was fit for divine fire. This This may or may not be complete nonsense, but if you repeat it in the wrong workshop, you might get laughed out of the furnace room. You sit near a low workbench as the mixing begins. One master scoops sand, another stirs in ash. The motion is quiet but rhythmic, like watching a baker. If the bread could cut your face when mishandled. There are no measuring cups, just handfuls, years of instinct. And when the blend is ready, it's poured into the crucible, which already glows from the furnace's belly. You expect them to talk now, maybe to say, "That's ready," or "Pour now." But no, it's all glances and subtle nudges. One man taps twice on the crucible with a paddle. That means ready. Another gives a shallow nod. No one's counting aloud. But you get the sense that every part of this process is timed, just not with clocks. And now, as the mixture begins to melt, forming that slow, syrupy lava, the room goes even quieter. Because this is the moment where noise is most dangerous. Vibrations can ripple through the crucible, sending bubbles through the mixture. These bubbles might cool into pockets of air, weakening the glass invisibly, until someone miles away installs a window and it crumbles without warning. Or worse, a bubble bursts while still in the molten stage, spitting a tiny bead of glass into someone's exposed skin. So everyone watches, silent as monks, while the first glow of new glass is born from nothing but dirt and dust. And somewhere behind you, someone whispers a word. It's short, unintelligible, but soft, reverent, almost like a benediction. No one reacts, which means it was the right word. You inch closer to the edge of the furnace now, the heat licking your face like a too eager puppy made of fire. Inside the crucible, the raw mix, once gritty and colorless, has begun to liquefy into a swirling pool of glowing honey. It doesn't bubble like a soup or sizzle like a steak. It simply glows, patient and terrifying, like it knows you'll make a mistake if you look away too long. Someone hands the master blower a long, hollow pipe, already warm from resting against the kiln wall. It's longer than you expect, at least 5 feet and soot-blackened from years of use. He twirls it gently, checking the balance. Then he dips one end into the glowing mix and rotates it slowly, like he's winding cotton candy at the gates of hell. You want to speak, ask a question, maybe just say, "Wow," but you don't. You remember the rule now. Speak too loudly, and you might pop a bubble. Breathe too hard and you might change the cooling rate. Cough at the wrong time and someone loses an hour's work or a week's dignity. So you stay quiet. You watch. The master draws up a glob too hot to touch, too sacred to drop. It clings to the pipe like molten taffy. He rolls it back and forth on a smooth slab of stone called a marver, shaping it into a gentle cylinder. Then he raises the pipe to his lips. This is the moment. You brace instinctively, not because it's dangerous though. It kind of is, but because he's about to do something almost absurdly delicate. He exhales. Not a puff, not a blow. It's more like a long, whispered sigh. Controlled, gentle, the breath of someone trying not to wake a sleeping baby in the middle of a thunderstorm. The glowing lump swells just slightly, like it's responding to a lullaby. Another breath. This one even slower. The glass expands, and you get it now. You finally understand why they whispered. Because this moment isn't about silence as safety. It's about silence as focus, as reverence, as control. Talking would break the spell, disrespect the breath, and possibly rupture a forming jug that's already halfway to beautiful. Here's your solid historical fact. This technique, known as freehand mouth-blown glassmaking, was already over 1,000 years old by the time these workshops perfected it in the late medieval period. It hadn't changed much since Roman times. What had changed was the intensity, the pressure, the obsession with getting the curve just right, the wall just thin enough, the lip just symmetrical enough to impress a bishop or intimidate a visiting noble. And then, of course, there were the legends. One fringe account from Bohemia describes a glassblower who could shape a goblet in total silence, blindfolded, guided only by the echoes of his own breath bouncing off the shop walls. The same story claims his apprentices once tried to recreate the feat, and all went blind from staring too long into the furnace. Historians still argue whether this is allegory, metaphor, or just a wild misinterpretation of a really poetic invoice. Back in the real workshop, the master has now puffed the glass to the size of a small melon. His assistant, silent and barefoot, brushes a damp cloth across the pipe's shaft, signaling readiness. They're moving as one now. No chatter, no affirmations. The same way a jazz duo doesn't need to speak mid-solo, they just know. He twirls the pipe, holding the glowing form parallel to the ground, letting gravity shape it into a more bulbous curve. The color shifts from amber to lemony gold as it cools, and tiny sparkles appear in the surface, air bubbles caught mid-dance. Some glassblowers aim for this, others treat it like failure. There's a debate still raging in modern circles over whether those early bubbles were a mistake or a feature. Some claim they add charm and character. Others argue they weaken the glass. Historians still argue whether medieval artisans embraced imperfections or desperately tried to hide them with flourishes and tinted dyes. Either way, the glassblower continues, extending the shape with a gentle heat and whispered breaths. He uses tongs that look more like surgical tools than forge implements. They squeak quietly when pressed against the soft edge, shaping what will become a neck or a lip, or maybe even the base of a lamp if the client pays in advance. You notice now, no one's looked at a blueprint. There is no blueprint. It's all memorized, internalized, spoken once long ago and now passed down by gesture, expression, breath. There's an apprentice standing nearby, mimicking every motion from 5 feet away, like a reflection in a cooler mirror. He's not allowed to touch yet, maybe not for another year, but when he does, he'll already know where every twitch belongs. And then something happens, a subtle crack, like an eggshell sighing. The glass hasn't broken, not yet, but it's spoken back. Everyone freezes, the master pauses, rotates the pipe again, tilts it, then gently reheats the piece at the glory hole, the secondary furnace mouth. Not what you're thinking, coaxing it back into pliability. Crisis averted. Barely. You feel your own breath catch. It's not just an art. It's a game of inches, of heartbeats, of silence and knowing when to surrender a piece rather than force it into something it refuses to become. Eventually, the form is finished. The master tips the pipe upward. The assistant taps lightly on the stem with a metal rod, a soft ping, and the glass separates, falling gently into a padded basket lined with old wool and soot materials chosen not for comfort, but for even cooling. They don't cheer, they don't clap, they just nod to one another and wipe the sweat from their brows. Then they move on. Another pipe, another breath, you exhale too, quietly. Of course, you're beginning to feel it now. The strange serenity that comes from long exposure to heat, silence, and the rhythm of breath work. Your thoughts soften, your shoulders slump, and the crackling of the fire becomes a kind of background music. You almost forget this is work until someone behind you hums, not sings, not speaks, just hums. And every head turns in quiet reprimand. The culprit, a young monk with soot across his forehead and an apologetic shrug. He's new. You can tell by the way he stands too close to the furnace, as if proximity equals mastery. It doesn't. Proximity only equals sweat. This is no ordinary workshop. It's nestled within the walls of a monastery. And here, glass blowing has become a monastic discipline. These aren't just artisans, they're brothers, and their vow of silence, already a spiritual tradition, happens to suit their trade rather perfectly. You watch as Brother Emil, the senior glass blower, selects a chunk of cullet leftover glass from a previous project and adds it to the furnace. Recycling is holy here. So is stillness. Even movement is sacred. You'd swear they've choreographed their tasks like a prayer in motion. That's your mainstream historical fact. Many monastic orders in medieval Europe took on trades like brewing, scribing, or yes, glass blowing, not just to support their abbeys financially, but to worship through craftsmanship. And in some rare monasteries, glass was considered a divine medium, transparent, luminous, and born from flame, just like the human soul. Apparently, if the metaphors held up, you ease down onto a stone bench near the wall. No one stops you. These monks believe in hospitality, even if it's offered in nods and quiet trays of bread left near your feet. You break off a piece. It's dry, but warm. Like everything else here, Brother Emil glances over his shoulder, and without speaking, gestures to a set of thin iron rods laid out like relics. You walk closer. Each one has a strange curve, a slight imperfection, or a notch. They're tools for shaping. Yes, but they're also part of the unspoken vocabulary of the trade. When Emil picks up one specific rod with a corkscrew end, the apprentice nearby immediately begins pumping the bellows with exactly 12 pulses. No instruction, just understanding. And here's the fringe tidbit of the hour. Some scholars believe these monks whispered specific chants as they shaped their glass not for prayer, but to manipulate airflow. Breath-matching incantations. They were sometimes called, supposedly. The cadence of certain syllables regulated how evenly a piece expanded. Is that true? No one agrees. Some call it pseudo-mysticism. Others think it was an early form of breathing technique, passed down through oral repetition and liturgical rhythm. Historians still argue whether those chants were genuine invocations or just glorified counting. Either way, when Brother Emil begins to exhale into the pipe, you notice his lips move, just slightly. No sound escapes, but something is being said, or sung, or prayed. You stand very still. The glob on the end of his pipe blooms like a slow sunrise, red to orange, then paler. He doesn't use the marver this time. He spins it in air, shaping with nothing but gravity. The piece stretches naturally, becoming a long, narrow tube, a flute, maybe, or a vial, or something ceremonial. Behind him, another monk holds a small wooden mold, two halves of a hollowed-out shape, lined with clay. When the glass reaches the right length, Emil dips it quickly into the mold, closes it, and gives one last exhale. The result, a perfect vessel, identical to the one made yesterday. And the day before, and the week before that, you've stepped into a production line of prayer. They make glass not to sell it, but to send it. To sister abbeys, to altars, to shrines in need of reliquaries and cruets and tiny ampules for oils no one dares spill. You spot a row of finished vials resting on a wooden plank, each one faintly tinted not with pigment, but with the minerals from the local sand. Pale green, smoky gray. One of them even has a faint purple swirl, likely from manganese traces. A happy accident that would have driven noble glassmakers insane, but gives these monks a kind of artistic shrug. Emil picks it up and turns it slowly in the firelight. He smiles, the kind of smile that says, I see you, God, in this wobble. Then he sets it down again. Here's the thing about monks and glass. They were often isolated from the flashy cathedrals and royal commissions. Their work didn't end up in chapels with rose windows or banquet halls lit by chandeliers. Their work went into the small, sacred, useful corners of the world hidden in pockets of pilgrims and inside the folds of traveling priests. You run a finger along one of the finished pieces. It's not smooth. It has tiny ridges, breath marks. The monks call them, they don't file them down. They leave them in as evidence, proof of the human breath that brought it to life. You think, maybe, for the first time all night, you understand the point. It's not about making perfect glass. It's about witnessing transformation, from sand to fire to breath to shape. From silence to intention. From error to beauty. Emil walks past you, nodding again. You realize that nod might be the closest thing to applause in this world. Then he turns back to the furnace and exhales. You're still riding that quiet high. The kind that comes after watching someone do something impossibly difficult and make it look like tying a shoelace. But then you start to notice something stranger. The murmurs. Not the usual whispering for focus kind. No, these are different. These are muttered names. Soft phrases. Half-sung words directed not at each other, but at the flames themselves. You glance at Brother Emil, who's now stirring the coals with a long, forked rod, and you catch it. A single word. Breathe toward the fire with the kind of reverence you'd reserve for a loved one or a particularly moody horse. It's not Latin, not anything you recognize. Then someone else says it, almost the same, but not quite. Another monk, at another furnace. And now you're officially confused, until one apprentice quietly leans over and barely audible above the crackling embers, says, it helps keep the flame in a good mood. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. The fire knows when you're angry. It listens. You think he's joking, until he doesn't smile. Welcome to the weirdly unspoken world of furnace whispering. You're not in church anymore. You're somewhere between folk ritual and workshop psychology. And depending on who you ask, the furnace isn't just a heat source. It's a living thing. Here's your historical fact. in multiple medieval workshops, especially those isolated from larger cities. Workers developed fire-related superstitions. Some believed flames could sense fear. Others thought each furnace had a personality, young ones being volatile, old ones requiring kindness, and all of them hating sudden change, which makes sense when you consider that these furnaces burned non-stop for weeks at a time. You didn't just light them up in the morning and shut them down at 5. They were fed constantly, their bellows pumped in careful rhythm, and any abrupt action could shock the chamber and crack the crucible, or worse, cause the glass batch to crystallize into useless sludge. You hear another whisper, "Still now, still now." The apprentice tending the bellows closes his eyes, pumping in a slow, even tempo. His foot moves like it's been trained in dance. A few scholars have speculated that this behavior evolved less from mysticism and more from desperation. A cracked crucible meant starting over. That meant days of lost labor, wasted fuel, and hungry clients. So, whispering to the furnace, a small price to pay for a few extra hours of heat and mercy. Still, historians argue whether these murmured fire names were rooted in pagan holdovers or simply stress-borne coping mechanisms passed down through habit. Some names recur across workshops: Rasa, Lumo, Aska, none of them traceable to saints, Latin phrases, or local dialects. No one knows where they came from. You stare into the furnace now, and well, you start to get it. It does look alive. The way it breathes, flickers, flares. It has moods, sometimes playful, sometimes cruel. If you poke it wrong, it sulks. If you feed it too much, it throws sparks like tantrums. And if you whisper to it, maybe it doesn't change the flame, but it changes you, makes you gentler, slower, more aware of how even your smallest actions might ripple through the room. There's a moment now when the fire suddenly dips too low. You feel it before anyone says anything, because no one does say anything. They just move. Two monks rush to adjust the air vents. One apprentice shifts fuel carefully, not dumping it in, but layering it like bedding for a fussy child. Brother Emil steps forward and leans in, face nearly flushed red. He breathes something low and private into the coals, and then the flame returns. Not with a roar, but with a steady, quiet whoosh, a soft, low reassertion of presence. The room relaxes. The glass continues. You watch this like it's a miracle, and maybe, to them, it is. The apprentice hands you a cracked shard from a recent project. It's a pale green, cloudy, and its surface ripples faintly. "We call these ghosted pieces," he says. "Fire took offense, or someone joked too loud." You nod. You believe it now. But not all whispering was reverent. There were stories still passed around in medieval pubs and abbey kitchens about blowers who mocked the flame, whispered lies, cursed at it. One tale, from a coastal workshop in what's now Brittany, tells of a journeyman who insulted the furnace with a bad poem. Every piece he made after that developed a twist, a permanent, useless twist. Of course, that's probably nonsense, or maybe the guy was just bad at his job. Still, no one dares read poetry in here now. At the back of the room is a small alcove, not a shrine. Not exactly, but a shelf with offerings. Cooled shards arranged like bones. Small bowls of ash, even what looks like dried rosemary bound with copper wire. You step toward it, but Brother Emil gently blocks your way. He smiles. He nods, but you understand. That corner is for whispers meant for fire alone. You sit again, watching the glow reflect off the monks' faces. They don't speak, but they do hum, sometimes soft, rhythmic hums, as if syncing with the furnace's own breath. You close your eyes, and for the first time, you swear the fire does seem calmer when spoken to kindly. Or maybe you're just breathing better now. The scent in the room shifts, not dramatically, but just enough that your nose twitches. You catch a whiff of something off a hint of copper, maybe faintly acrid, with a syrupy sweetness beneath it. Someone nearby coughs, just once, then returns to total silence. You've entered the world of color. The glowing glass you've watched so far, honey-colored, cloudy green, the occasional smoky violet that was just the beginning. Those shades were gifts of accident, minerals hiding in river sand or ash that hadn't been burned thoroughly. But when it came to making intentional colors, things got dangerous and expensive. You follow the silent flow of the workshop to a side table, A monk unrolls a canvas cloth, revealing dozens of tiny jars. They're filled with powders, some matte and chalky, others glittering like crushed gemstones. One is a dark, rich blue, another nearly black, but with red undertones. There's a golden one too, though your gut tells you not to ask what it costs. Brother Emil handles the jars with the kind of care usually reserved for relics or venomous snakes. He unscrews one slowly and dips a blade in, just a fleck, just a breath of powder. Then he walks it to the furnace, his hands never shaking. You learn quickly, these aren't dyes, they're metal oxides. Mainstream history moment, here we go. To color glass, medieval artisans used very specific additives. Cobalt for blue, copper for green, iron for brownish reds, manganese for purples and decolorizing. And if you really wanted to show off gold chloride for an intense ruby red, it was the Rolex of glass tints. But even more intriguing was the purple, the dreaded purple. You sit down near a wide glass window, well, wide by monastery standards, and trace the outline of a deep violet pane. It's not smooth. It has air bubbles like champagne and a swirl that looks like a fingerprint frozen in time. Purple glass was considered cursed by some, not because it looked bad, quite the opposite. It was too beautiful, too rich, too unstable. The irony, purple, for centuries, had been the color of royalty and divine authority. Bishops wanted it, dukes demanded it, but the methods to create it were inconsistent, bordering on magical. It could turn out lavender, indigo, or mud, and it cracked more often than not. Historians still argue whether the instability was due to poor temperature control or the unpredictability of manganese interacting with iron. Either way, commissions involving purple glass were dangerous, not just artistically but financially. You hear the whispers now, not toward the furnace this time, but toward the color. Don't let it split. Cool slow. Keep her calm. They gender the glass sometimes, the purple especially, as if it's a temperamental queen pacing behind stained curtains, ready to shatter if overheated or insulted. And there are stories, you've probably guessed that by now. One involves a traveling bishop who ordered a circular window to be done in concentric rings of purple and gold. The workshop deep in Flanders attempted it 3 times. Each attempt cracked during cooling. On the 4th try, they succeeded. But the final window pane contained a thin spiral, barely visible, like a snail shell made of storm clouds. The bishop loved it. The glaziers hated it, because they knew the spiral wasn't art. It was the scar of something that had almost gone wrong. Another tale, more fringe, tells of a nun in Milan who made violet glass in secret, without her abbess's blessing. It cracked clean through the day she took her final vows. No one's sure if the story is metaphor, punishment, or poor batch control, but they whisper it anyway. You lean closer to the workshop's current project. A series of long, narrow tubes probably destined to be cut and shaped into sections of cathedral windows. They've added copper to one, cobalt to another, and then the tiniest flake of gold to a third. You hold your breath without meaning to. The result is hypnotic. The molten glob glows with an orange-red flame, then darkens into a berry-red core as it spins on the marver. It's not a primary color. It's not something you'd find in nature. It feels unnatural, almost, like it shouldn't exist, like it's burning from the inside. No one speaks, not even a whisper. Then the assistant nods. The piece is transferred into the annealing oven for slow cooling, and someone finally exhales. You glance over at a half-ruined wall, and there they are, color samples, hundreds of them, embedded in the plaster. Old experiments, test pieces, swatches of failure and brilliance. Some are streaked with black veins, others have cracks sealed with wax. A few are flawless and unsigned. This, they say, was the secret cathedral currency. Not money, not gold, but recipes. Entire wars of silence were fought over a single shade of blue. Guilds kept their formulas locked in lead boxes. Apprentices were sworn to secrecy under penalty of exile, or worse, employment in a beer hall. And yet, some whispered anyway. One whispered too well. A story still told in northern Italy claims a runaway apprentice carried the formula for a never-before-seen violet to a rival glass house. That violet turned out to be unstable, reactive to sunlight, and prone to spontaneous cracking on warm days. So they buried it, the whole batch, and swore never to make it again. You look down at your hands. One of them is reflecting a strange hue. The last piece you touched, it's cooling now, casts a purple glow. It's faint. But they're not dangerous, not cursed, just complicated. Like all beautiful things, the heat has begun to feel normal, which is strange, considering your boots are practically sticking to the soot-covered floor, and every breath still carries that metallic tinge of smoke, melted sand, and sweat-drenched wool. But it's like your body has stopped fighting it. It's adapting, like the glass, softening, shifting, holding its shape under quiet pressure. In this new state of awareness, you start to notice the subtle choreography of hands, not tools, not voices, just fingers. Every motion in the workshop, every breath, every twirl, every pass of the iron pipe is communicated in silence. And not just silence, but gesture. The monks speak an entire language through their fingertips. One raised index finger, pause. A flat palm held sideways, keep rolling. A small tap on the shoulder followed by a slow blink. That means please don't ruin the piece I just spent an hour shaping. You're witnessing the secret code of the Blowers Guild. Here's your historical anchor. While very little documentation survives, scholars agree that glassblowers across Europe developed silent, standardized gesture systems. These blowing signs were passed from master to apprentice, much like a secret handshake or, more accurately, a workplace mime act with high stakes and 1300-degree lava blobs. It wasn't just for the monks. Secular guilds in Venice, Bohemia, France, anywhere glass was made developed similar systems. Because when a single shout could ripple the surface of a forming vase and ruin it, speech became the enemy of precision. Silence wasn't passive. It was a skill. And gestures, they were the glue. You watch two men move as one. One shapes, one rotates, one holds the tweezers just so. The other taps a rhythm on the pipe with a bone-handled tool. You realize they're not just communicating. They're listening with their eyes. Even the apprentices know the code. Especially the apprentices. One boy, no older than 14, stands barefoot near the marver, mimicking the gestures of the senior monk beside him. He doesn't touch a thing, but his fingers twitch with every signal. His body mirrors the breath patterns. His silence isn't passive, it's practice. Then you see it. The senior monk lifts one hand, thumb and pinky extended, like the hang loose sign, only slower. The apprentice tilts the cooling tray without hesitation. Perfect angle, perfect timing. You didn't see a cue, but they did. Some gestures are practical ready. Stop, cool now. Others are more abstract. You catch one that looks like a slow spiraling motion with the index finger. It seems to mean watch closely. This part matters. Another is a kind of tapping circle over the chest, which might be careful. She's going thin. And yes, they often gender the glass, usually female, sometimes plural, sometimes temperamental. You try to ask someone, with just your face, what a particular gesture means. The monk laughs silently. Of course, one fringe theory, you recall, suggests that this sign language actually predated modern European sign systems, that it evolved independently in various guilds, much like maritime flags or drum codes. Historians still argue whether these blowing signs influenced early deaf education or whether they simply existed in parallel. But in this workshop, they're alive and thriving, and precise to the point of poetry. There's even etiquette. You don't wave broadly. You don't signal across someone else's line of sight. You wait your turn in the silent sentence. The whole room functions like a conversation made entirely of nudges, eyebrows, and forearms. You begin to feel oddly jealous. Not of the talent, it's clear you'd shatter something within seconds, but of the trust. This is not a workplace where shouting across the room is tolerated. There's no, hey, Dave, toss me the mold. There's just intention, presence, respect. Imagine that in your office. One tap, meeting now. Two taps, skip it. They brought donuts. You return your gaze to the marver. A new piece is forming a tall, narrow-necked bottle with a delicate lip. The assistant holds a flat paddle near the glass, not touching it, just hovering. One gentle tilt of the head from the blower, and the paddle lowers, just grazing the lip to flatten it. No noise, no confirmation, just the understanding. I've got you. And it's not just efficiency, it's survival. These gestures evolved because glass blowing is physically dangerous. Hot pipes, open furnaces, shards underfoot. You can't afford a misunderstanding. And when your lungs are your power source, you don't waste air yelling instructions, you conserve it. You use it wisely, like a monk, like a dancer, like someone who knows that control is the only thing standing between art and accident. You catch one more signal before the piece goes into the annealing oven, a slow circle drawn in the air with the forefinger, followed by both palms lifted, fingers spread wide. It looks like praise. The apprentice bows slightly. He's beaming. He didn't blow the glass, but he shaped the moment. You lie back against the warm brick of the wall and watch the hands at work. They never stop. Even when no glass is on the pipe, the hands speak. They prepare. They warn. They joke. Yes, there's humor here too. A small, hidden sign where one monk gently pokes another with an invisible finger. A signal that says, "Don't look now." But Brother Emil just made another weird spiral. You think maybe, just maybe, they like the spirals. You're starting to understand the rhythm now. It's not just the whoosh of the furnace or the low hum of breath. It's the quiet waiting between things, the held pause between gathering and shaping, the stillness between the exhale and the twist, and sometimes the pause before disaster. Because tonight, you're about to witness something that makes even the veterans shift uneasily. A piece begins to sing. At first, it's subtle. Just a high, almost imperceptible note vibrating through the room, like someone striking a wine glass across the room with a silver spoon. But no one's touching anything. The piece, an elegantly curved bell jar, nearing the final shaping stage, hangs at the end of the pipe, cooling just slightly. Then the sound comes again. This time, it's louder. The apprentice nearest the sound flinches. The monk shaping the base stops completely. Everyone turns toward the furnace, and no one breathes. Welcome to the eerie phenomenon known in old glassblower folklore as singing glass. It's not a metaphor. It's not an omen. It's a structural tension, and it's real. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Certain shapes of glass, especially thin-walled vessels with long necks or dome-like curves, can produce faint sounds as the internal stresses shift during cooling. When that stress gets uneven, the glass vibrates like a tuning fork. That vibration can cause a sound, sometimes a ringing, sometimes a low hum, sometimes a scream. It doesn't happen often, and when it does, it's not a good sign. You inch closer and see it now. A subtle shimmer around the base of the jar, a ripple, like heat rising off pavement, but it's inside the glass. One of the monks points silently to the pipe. The master nods. The jar is lowered slowly, ever so slowly, into the annealing chamber. The door closes with a padded thunk. The sound stops. No one says anything for a full minute. Then someone finally exhales. Here's the fringe belief. In several surviving guild journals, there are mentions of singing vessels being possessed. Not figuratively, literally. They were considered cursed, filled with wind spirits or trapped voices from failed apprentices. One Flemish legend even claims that a singing goblet once shattered mid-feast, slicing through the air and cutting a nobleman's cheek. From that moment on, the workshop was declared tainted, and the tools buried in a nearby river. Historians still argue whether that account was based on truth, political sabotage, or the world's earliest product recall. Back in the workshop, the tension lingers. You can feel it in your spine. Even the dogs outside have gone quiet. A monk leans toward you and whispers not toward the furnace, not toward the glass. But to you, it happens when they're rushed. You nod, as if you knew that already. He adds, or when something wants to stay molten. You blink, and he's already walking away. The piece won't be checked until morning. It'll cool in the annealer overnight slowly, evenly, like putting a dragon to sleep. Too fast, and it cracks. Too slow, and it warps. You're told not to touch the handle, not to breathe near it, just in case. You turn toward the far wall, where broken pieces are laid out like crime scene evidence. There are jars with collapsed sides, vases with heat cracks spiraling like lightning bolts. One piece has a melted lip that curled in on itself like it wanted to vanish. They keep them here not as shame, but as memory, as warning. There's a tale in one corner of the room, a wall drawing, actually scratched into the plaster. It shows a man standing over a broken goblet, a faint line emerges from the glass, winding upward to his open mouth. He's singing. Or maybe the glass is the inscription beneath it reads, Quod sonat. Frangit. That which sings will break. You sit quietly now. Everyone does. Because when glass sings, no one dares interrupt the song. You think back to a question that's been bubbling in your brain for hours now. Why would anyone whisper around something that can't hear? But now, after the singing, you think maybe that is the wrong question. Maybe it's not about whether the glass can hear. Maybe it's about whether you can. The monks start again. A new piece, a new breath. No one mentions the jar. No one needs to. It's still singing. Somewhere, inside its little box, and everyone's pretending not to listen, the night deepens. Outside, you can just barely make out the sound of hooves on cobblestone. A cart creaking. Maybe even a distant tavern song half muffled, half drunken. But in here, time is its own creature. No bells, no clocks, only breath and fire. You move closer to the edge of the workshop now, where the walls are thick with soot and secrets. There's a table that looks oddly pristine polished wood, not splattered with ash or burn marks. On it sits a single folded map, a coil of parchment, and a sealed letter bearing a wax emblem, a lion swallowing a flame. A monk gently touches the letter, doesn't open it, just nods at you. And with that nod comes a new layer of the story. This is the part where the silence doesn't stay in one place, because some whispers weren't just for fire, some were for espionage. Tonight, you're hearing the smuggled whispers of Venetian envy, mainstream history time. By the late Middle Ages, the island of Murano, just off the coast of Venice, had become the world capital of glassmaking. It was elite. It was revered. It was ruthlessly protected. Venetian authorities banned glassblowers from leaving the island. If you did, you risked exile, imprisonment, even death. That's how far they went to protect their monopoly. So naturally, people left anyway, sometimes to escape, sometimes to profit, sometimes just to whisper secrets somewhere else. You run a finger along the map, it shows trade routes, coastal ports, narrow mountain passes, dotted lines that could easily double as escape paths, arrows, names, some scratched out, others circled in red ink so old it's turned brown. The monk taps the map twice. He doesn't say anything, but the message is clear. They stole the fire, you're shown a tool next. It's not like the others, shorter, more decorative. The grip is engraved with initials definitely not Latin. And along its stem, a faint pattern of waves and stars. Murano. It's contraband. Probably smuggled in a crate of wine or hidden in a bag of barley. Maybe even brought in strapped to a body like a weapon. Whatever the method, it got here, and with it came something far more valuable than the tool itself. Technique. Venetian glassblowers had secrets, especially when it came to making the elusive, nearly invisible cristallo glass. It was purer, clearer, more refined than anything else in Europe, and workshops everywhere wanted it. Badly, but they couldn't just copy it, they had to steal it. Hence the whispers, not whispered prayers, now coded conversations, phrases that meant nothing to outsiders but everything to those in the know. The sun sleeps beneath the pipe might have meant, the mixture is ready. Let the wolf drink air could have been, cool the neck slower. One fringe theory claims entire notebooks were written in blower code, a mix of symbols, color marks, and false recipes. Some historians believe a set of these codes was recovered in Prague and hidden inside the lining of a bishop's robe. Others dismiss it entirely, calling it early industrial paranoia. Historians still argue whether these codes were real trade documents or invented myths to explain sudden leaps in regional quality. But you're staring at the proof right now. A real Murano tool in a silent abbey workshop far from Venice. And that's not all. One monk shows you a panel of cooled glass, not fancy, not even colored. Just a thin, flat pane, but it's clear, like water. No green hue, no ash flecks, no cloudy corners. You've seen nothing like it all night. He holds it up to the firelight, and the flame dances straight through. Then he holds up a regular panel beside it, greenish, thicker, dull. You get it. This one, was whispered differently, and it's valuable. So valuable that its existence here is dangerous. You notice now that the storage room in the back is locked with not one, not two, but 3 iron bolts. You had assumed it was for tools, maybe finished pieces, but now you know that's where they keep the knowledge. And yes, it's whispered knowledge. Not recorded in books, not carved in stone, spoken only between master and apprentice, spoken in dialects that shifted by region, shaped by flame, whispered, always whispered, because paper could be stolen, but breath disappears. You hear a final whisper as the clear glass is set into a padded crate lined with wool and straw. To Lubeck, someone mouths, another city, another whisper waiting to be lit, and as you watch the crate close, it occurs to you, they weren't just blowing glass, they were smuggling silence. You step back from the smuggled glass, the silent crates, the sealed maps, and return to the core of the workshop. The firelight feels different now, less mystical, more tactical, every ember glowing with secrets, every breath carrying more than air. And then you notice something. The badges, not flashy, not medals, just small circular marks burned or stitched into the aprons and cuffs of the older monks. A stylized flame inside a ring, a tiny pipe crossed with tongs. Some even have notches, 1, 2, 3, along the edge, like clock hands frozen in place. You found the guild. Because yes, these monks aren't just part of a holy order. They're members of a much older, quieter fraternity, the Guild of the Breathless. Here's your historical anchor. Across Europe in the late medieval period, glassblowers organized into guilds, just like masons, carpenters, and blacksmiths. These weren't just trade unions, they were gatekeepers of knowledge. They regulated apprenticeships, monitored quality, and most importantly, guarded secrets. But the Guild of the Breathless, that one's less documented, mostly whispered about. Some claim it was a real underground network. Others think it was a nickname for a particularly strict Venetian branch. But the Abbey you're in tonight, they act like it's real, and they wear the symbols openly. Each badge marks a rank. No one explains it to you, not with words. But you start to piece it together. 3 notches, Master Blower. 2, Journeyman. 1, Apprentice. And no badge at all. You're just watching. You get the sense that if you asked directly, you'd be ignored. But if you listen, you might learn something. You sit near a barrels of cullet discarded glass shards, just in time to witness an initiation. No announcements, no ceremony, just a subtle shift in attention. The apprentices part slightly. One of them young, nervous, scarred from one too many near misses, steps forward, gripping a pipe with both hands. His movements are deliberate, not perfect, but focused. He gathers a lump of molten glass. He doesn't flinch. He walks it to the marver, rolling it slowly, while a senior monk watches from a shadowed bench. The boy breathes not too shallow, not too quick. Then he lifts the pipe, cheeks puffing slightly. He whispers something into it and exhales. The glass blooms. One breath, controlled, no cracks. The monk watching gives a slow nod. No applause, no words, just a hand extended to the side, palm down. Another monk steps forward and hands the boy a badge. 1 notch. It's pressed to his cuff. Quickly, before the heat can sting. He bows, deep, not performative, grateful, then gets back to work. You realize this guild doesn't mark entry with oaths or contracts. It marks it with breath control. If you can't blow glass without panicking, you don't belong. If you can't shape under silence, you wait. If you break too many pieces, you scrub the tools. It's not cruelty, it's calibration. The monks operate like a machine, but a gentle one. Each person knows their part, and when someone forgets, the others whisper to correct it. Not scold, not shame, just guide. One fringe detail, mentioned only once in a crumbling lion ledger, describes how some guilds punished talkative apprentices, not with lashes, with silencing tools, a special mask part gag, part training aid designed to teach breath control through restriction. Sounds dramatic, even cruel. Historians still argue whether it was ever used, or simply a misinterpretation of a plague-era breathing mask. Either way, you feel a chill. Because here, silence isn't a suggestion, it's discipline. And it's earned. You glance again at the master blower. 3 notches burned into his leather cuff. His eyes don't rest. He sees everything, not in a menacing way, but in that ever-present, furnace-aware, breath-counting way. He makes no gestures. He doesn't need to. He trained them. Probably trained the one who trained them. And maybe, just maybe, he's been here longer than the Abbey itself. You walk past a rack of finished pieces, all marked with tiny sigils, the guild's stamp, etched near the base. It's subtle. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd never see it. But they're all there. Some guilds used initials. Others used fingerprints pressed gently into the base of the glass before final cooling. Some used coded scratches, only visible under angled candlelight, not to claim credit, to signal origin. Like leaving a whisper for the next person to find, you suddenly understand the name. Breathless, not because they didn't breathe, but because they learned how much to give. Just enough, never too much, and always with intention. You think about all the modern jobs you've had deadlines, emails, forced productivity, and then you look at this. People communicating in silence, shaping fire into form, marking their progress not with promotions but with breaths well spent. No one here is rushing, but everything is getting done. You sit on the floor and close your eyes. You start to notice your own breathing again. And for a moment, you wonder what your badge would look like if you were part of this guild. Maybe no notches yet, but you're learning. And they notice. You wake from your light doze with a twitch, half ashamed, half warmed by the fact that no one judged you for nodding off against the cool stone wall around you. The workshop hums with its usual quiet ballet. The monks are still at it. They never stop. Not because they must, but because the breath must continue. Tonight, though, you're being shown something different. Not a tool, not a technique, a lesson. It starts with a whisper, a real one, directed from a master toward a kneeling apprentice. Not scolding, not encouraging, just instructing. And you realize you're watching a whispered apprenticeship. Here's the historical anchor. In many medieval trades especially, those as tactile and volatile as glass-blowing apprentices weren't taught with diagrams or written instructions. They learned through observation, imitation, and muttered phrases repeated again and again until muscle memory became mastery. But in this workshop, those whispers are ritual. You move in closer. The apprentice is crouched, pipe balanced across his thighs. In front of him is a glob of half-cooled cullet, reshaped and re-softened for practice. Not for display, not for sale, just for learning. The master leans down, close enough for beard hairs to graze the boy's cheek, and whispers a phrase you can't quite catch. The boy exhales, but the breath is wrong. Too sharp, too uneven. The piece cracks slightly on one side. No punishment, no groan, just another whisper. The boy nods. Try again. This time, the exhale is steadier. The glass turns. A little swell, a little stretch. Better, and you catch the whisper this time. Let the breath walk. It's poetic. It's vague. But the boy understands. And soon, so do you. The breath is not a blow. It's not a shove. It's not a force. It's a guide. It leads the glass where it wants to go. And if you force it, it breaks. The parallels are hard to ignore. You're shown the forbidden words next. Yes, really. One of the monks presents a wooden tablet. It's old, smoke-darkened, and carved with a list of what you assume are terms. All crossed out. You read just a few before the tablet is pulled away. Snap. Pop. Push. Fast. All banned. Why? Because they suggested aggression, abruptness, danger. In this guild, in this furnace world, you didn't snap the pipe. You released it. You didn't pop the bubble. You opened it. Words mattered, and the wrong ones could shift the mood. There's a fringe account from a 15th century French guild manual that claims certain words, if spoken aloud in a workshop, would cause every piece made that day to fail. Was it psychological? Maybe. Was it superstition? Probably. Historians still argue whether these taboos reflect mental conditioning or genuine belief in word magic. But here, they don't argue. They just obey. The whispered words passed from master to apprentice here are strange, flowery, even. You hear phrases like, curve the shadow, brush the breath, hold the edge like it sings. They don't make sense at first. until you watch them applied, and then it clicks. They're not instructions. They're metaphors for how to feel the glass. The silence isn't just for concentration, it's for translation from intuition to action. One master takes your hand gently, places it near the glowing neck of a half-formed vessel, not touching, just close enough to feel the heat pulse. He whispers, "It's tense. Back off." And he's right. You feel it. The heat's vibration, just barely. The pressure in the form. It's alive in its own way, and you're beginning to understand the language. You peek into a small, leather-bound notebook, resting near a pile of cooled shards. It's an apprentice's journal. Not formal, no lined pages, just charcoal scribbles and barely legible notes written in shorthand. One page reads, "Breathe in 4, wait 2, out in 6, hold the roll." Another, "Master says don't look at the color, feel it in your teeth." I think that's real. You laugh silently. Because yeah, some of this seems ridiculous, until you remember that every beautiful thing in here was made by people who believed exactly that. You think of music, of sports, of cooking. Any skill that lives in the fingertips first and only enters the brain later. Glass is no different. You start mimicking the whispers now, not speaking them aloud, but mouthing them, feeling how they shape your own breath. Let the breath walk, curve the shadow, feel it in your teeth. It works. You don't even need a pipe in your hands to feel your body slow down. Your jaw unclenches. Your mind softens around the heat. You're not just witnessing a tradition, you're being drawn into it. That's how the apprentices learn. Not through rules, through presence. They are whispered into belonging, one breath at a time. By now, your ears are so attuned to the workshop's silence that you can hear the tiniest things: a brush of soot across the floor, the faint creak of a wooden mold being opened, even the soft shift of someone's robes as they lean too close to the cooling oven. Every sound matters here, and that's why the next story hits different. Because tonight, you are told about the wind spirits. It begins with a sudden crack, sharp, thin, like a twig breaking in a distant forest. A finished piece on the shelf just split along its side. No one touched it. No one even breathed on it. Still, it fractured. No warning, no drama. Just an echo of pressure finally letting go. The monk closest to it doesn't sigh, doesn't even flinch. He only whispers under his breath, so softly you almost miss it. Another spirit got out. You blink. He doesn't explain, so someone else does. An older monk, one of the pipe makers, leans against a bench and gestures you over. In his hands is a shard of what used to be a pitcher. He turns it in the light, showing you a strange shimmer across the inside curve like oil on water, but cold. That's not a flaw, he says. That's a footprint. You smile, thinking it's a joke. It's not. Welcome to one of the more supernatural corners of medieval glassmaking folklore. The belief that sudden cracks, unexpected fractures, or deformations weren't caused by bad technique, but by wind spirits. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Sudden temperature shifts or drafts in glass workshops often caused internal stress within cooling pieces, making them crack unexpectedly. In modern terms, it's a physics problem. In medieval terms, a haunting. You're shown a series of charms next. Tucked under a bench, a bundle of dried herbs tied to the cooling oven's back hinge. A braid of horsehair knotted with copper wire, etched into a corner tile, a spiraled sigil resembling a snail's shell. They aren't decorations, they're protections against wind. A monk confirms, not breezes, spirits. There's even a designated shelf for what they call ghosted glass pieces that look perfect at first glance, but hum or shimmer slightly when held. The monks don't destroy them. They don't use them. They just keep them nearby, like watching over troubled children. One story you're told, in the softest voice of the night, is about a journeyman who once made a flawless goblet clear, perfectly shaped, no bubbles, no warps. It cooled just fine. But when he picked it up the next morning, it was full of water, condensation. Maybe, but they swear the goblet was dry the night before. The monk telling the story lifts a finger. Water from nowhere means a wind spirit tried to cool itself. Is it true? Fringe, obviously. But historians have noted similar beliefs across multiple regions, from Ireland to Bavaria to Syria. Different names, same idea. Invisible spirits of air and breath could live inside glass, not because the glass was magic, but because it had held human breath once. And that breath, in failing to settle, left a gap, a hollow, a place for something else to live. Historians still argue whether these stories were literal beliefs or ways to explain inconsistencies in a pre-scientific era. But the monks here, they don't argue. They just whisper back. One even shows you a charm he wears under his tunic. It's a glass bead, imperfect and dark purple wrapped in twine. It's not pretty, but it was his first haunted piece. It cracked in the kiln, then refused. A complete anomaly. And ever since, he's worn it to keep the air still. Because that's the point. You realize it's not about ghosts. Not really. It's about drafts. Airflow matters. Even a slight breeze from an open door can spell disaster. Not just for the furnace, but for every piece in transition, the monks keep the doors shut. Not just for heat, but for harmony. Every current must be intentional. Every breath directed. No chaos. No swirling air. The workshop itself is shaped around this principle. Thick walls, low ceilings, no windows near the kilns. Even the bellows are hand-pumped, not foot-driven because feet can slip, but hands can feel resistance. Adapt in real time. Control, stillness, deliberate breath. You glance toward a cracked panel laid carefully in a straw-lined tray. Someone has etched a swirl around the crack with a red-hot needle, marking the wind spirit's path. You ask without speaking what happens to it now. The monk answers by wrapping it in cloth, placing it in a box marked with chalk glyphs, and sliding it beneath the workbench. It won't be melted down. It'll be stored, watched, because who knows, maybe the spirit will calm down. Or maybe it already has. You're beginning to feel the weight of the silence now, not as pressure, but as protection, a cocoon. A gentle wrapping that holds the noise of the outside world at bay. No market cries, no footsteps, no barking dogs, just the hiss of fire, the breath of men, and the occasional whisper when it matters. But even here inside this sanctuary of stillness, there's no escape from the brutal truth of labor. Because tonight, someone's work just cracked, and with it, so did their wages. The piece was a tall, slender carafe designed for an aristocrat's wine table, commissioned with specific measurements and a fleur-de-lis pressed into the base. The blower was an older monk with 2 notches on his cuff, experienced, quiet, reliable, but something went wrong. Maybe it cooled too fast, maybe the furnace breathed too hard, maybe he exhaled 1/2 beat too strong. You heard the crack, so did he. Everyone did. No one says anything. He sets the pipe down, walks away, and now the real story begins. You're ushered to a corner of the workshop you haven't noticed before, quieter than the rest. If such a thing is possible, it's where the ledgers are kept. Notebooks, scrolls, slates, carefully maintained and occasionally dusted. A young monk slides one toward you. Inside, columns, names, dates, pieces, status, payment. And next to each entry is a tiny mark for finished, for cooling, for cracked. One means no pay, no questions, no exceptions. Here's your historical fact. In many guilds, especially the more prestigious glass houses, workers were often compensated per successful piece, not by the hour, not by the day, but by product. And if it cracked, warped, or clouded, you got nothing. That's what made the silence not just sacred, but necessary. It protected your livelihood. So when a single breath could undo hours of labor, the pressure wasn't poetic. It was survival. The monk with the cracked carafe returns now. His face is calm, but the slump in his shoulders tells you everything. No lecture, no scolding, just the absence of approval. He erases his own mark from the slate, and then he starts over. New pipe, new gather, new breath. Because what else can you do? There's a saying among the older monks. The furnace forgives, but the ledger forgets. You're not sure whether it's meant as comfort or warning. You're shown the wage wall next. It's not gold, not even copper. Just a row of wooden tokens hanging on tiny pegs, each engraved with a symbol that matches a monk's cuff. One for every finished piece. At the end of the week, the tokens are tallied and exchanged for rations, cloth, and sometimes a silver coin or two. You count. Some monks have 4 tokens. Some have 12. The older monk, none. Not this week. The economy of the guild is harsh but fair. Reputation helps, but glass doesn't care about your reputation. It only listens to your breath. A fringe tidbit appears here, one you overhear in a low conversation near the supply bench. In some secular glass houses, punishments for repeated cracks included temporary bans from touching the pipe. You'd be assigned to ash duty sifting powders, stirring mixtures, prepping molds, until you proved your hands were steady again. A form of penance. Some even called it the silence of shame. Historians still argue whether this was standardized or just workshop culture passed off as policy. Regardless, it makes sense now. Cracking wasn't just failure, it was betrayal of trust, of material, of balance. The apprentice from earlier, remember him, the one who earned his first notch. He brings the older monk a fresh goblet mold. Doesn't say anything, just places it gently on the workbench beside him and gives a short nod. That's all it takes. No words, just shared breath. That's the real economy here. Not tokens, not tally marks, but solidarity. You peek into a side room and see pieces stacked along a stone shelf. They're warped, chipped, clouded. They won't be paid for, but they're not trash. They're practice. Some will be melted down, others kept for study. One or two reworked into something else, a lamp base, a window tile, a paperweight for the Abbey scriptorium. Nothing is wasted. Even failure has form. Back in the main hall, the older monk lifts his new gather, twirls the pipe, begins again. You hold your breath without realizing it, and this time, no crack. Just a clean, elegant exhale. You hear someone whisper behind you, "He's forgiven." Maybe by the furnace, maybe by himself. Either way, the breath goes on. The furnace, once angry and glowing like a dragon's chest, has calmed into something steadier now, like a fireplace that never quite stops murmuring. You're not sure how many hours it's been, but you can feel something shifting in the room. The rhythm has slowed. The monks are quieter still, not exhausted, just reflective. And then someone walks in from the cold night air. He isn't young, his steps are slow, his eyes are steady, and his hands chap. Calloused, curve tremble just a little as he lowers his hood. You watch every monk in the workshop pause, only for a second, but they pause. And you realize, this is him, the master glassblower. 3 notches on his cuff, a 4th mark, different etched not into his apron, but into the back of his hands, a swirling brand like a spiral, burned in ink and time. He doesn't speak. Of course not. He just walks to the far bench, takes a pipe already resting on the rack, and sits. You expect him to start shaping, blowing. He doesn't. He just stares into the fire and exhales. The breath is long, even, familiar. Everyone watches, but from a respectful distance. You inch closer to a young monk polishing finished pieces. He leans toward you, whispers, "He's done with blowing." The monk explains, "This is his last vigil." You blink. The term sounds ceremonial, sacred, and maybe it is. You've stepped into something intimate now. A tradition not written down, not part of any official guild record, but it's unmistakably real. Here's your historical fact. Master artisans in many medieval trades passed down their secrets not in ink but in person, in final acts of creation. Their last project was often a symbolic offering, something simple, perfect, meant to hold all they'd learned, a final breath, literally. And after that, they were done. Tonight, you're witnessing one. No one helps him. No one dares. He moves with slow precision, gathering a small glob of glass on the pipe's end, not too much, just enough for a single vessel, a farewell piece. He rolls it gently on the marver, breathes once, twice. Each exhale, a page in the book of his memory. One monk nearby holds a mold, but never offers it. The master doesn't need it. He shapes freehand, letting gravity and rotation do the work. The piece grows from a golden bead to a teardrop shape, then curves outward, narrowing like the neck of a bell. No corrections, no tongs, just breath. You don't realize you're leaning forward until your knees ache. This piece isn't meant for display. It's not for sale. It's not even for use. It's for memory. You hear someone whisper the old phrase, "When the breath ends, the shape remembers." You look closer. The vessel he's forming clear, simple, elegant isn't special because of what it will become. It's special because of what it won't be. It won't be remade. It won't be corrected. It won't be followed by another. It is, in every sense, the last one. One fringe tale comes to mind. In a guild record from Bohemia, there's mention of a master whose final breath piece was buried with him. Another story from Spain claims one was sealed inside the cathedral it helped fund. Historians still argue whether these pieces were symbolic gestures or just romanticized retirements. But in this room, you feel no doubt this is real. And then it happens. He stops. The glass hangs at the pipe's end, soft but formed. He lifts it gently, passes it to the apprentice nearest him, a boy who looks like he's forgotten how to breathe. The master doesn't speak. He just closes the boy's hands around the pipe and walks away. He doesn't bow. He doesn't look back. He just removes his cuff with the notches and leaves it on the bench. And then he disappears into the shadows behind the furnace. Not gone, just no longer blowing. And the silence that follows, it's not sad, it's full. Like an exhale that's finally done everything it came here to do. The vessel, the final breath piece, cools now in the annealing oven, resting like a glowing ember from a fire that's finally settled. The apprentice, still clutching the pipe, hasn't moved in what feels like minutes. Around him, the others return to their quiet motions. But something's shifted. You feel it, like a storm has passed, and left behind only silence. You sit once more against the cool stone wall, letting it all settle in. The whispers, the breaths, the tools, the gestures, the cracked pieces, the haunted ones. And now, this, a room that just watched a legacy exhale its last word. It feels like the right time to step outside, but not just yet. First, you're led to the archives. Not a grand library, just a narrow stone room near the back, where the walls sweat with old fire and the parchment curls from years of exposure. Here, the history of this place lives not in books, but in fragments, pieces of old glass, slivers wrapped in cloth, tiny sketches on goatskin. Every shelf holds a story. You're shown a fragment of a church window, deep blue, shaped like the edge of a wing, one of ours. A monk whispers, then another, the broken lip of a goblet, cloudy with age, etched with a symbol you recognize from a cuff badge, and here a full page torn from a letter, written in a rush, smeared with soot. If they find the formula, tell them it was breath, not fire. That shaped her. You want to read more, but the monk gently closes the drawer. You've seen enough, he says softly, and he's right. You've seen the heart of it, not the flame. Not the tools, not even the glass, the whispers, the words passed from mouth to mouth, lip to lip, soft enough not to ripple the air, but strong enough to shape the world. Because all of it was held together by quiet. You pass the annealer on your way out. The farewell piece is nearly cool now. It looks like a teardrop sealed in amber, perfect in its stillness. Someone's written something beneath it in chalk. Remember the breath. You step out into the early dawn light. The sky is just beginning to bleed orange across the horizon. The air is cooler, thinner, cleaner. You exhale, and for the first time, you truly hear yourself, not loudly, not forcefully, just enough. The way they taught you, the way it has always been done. The light outside is gentle now, barely pressing at the edge of the world, and the last of the furnace's warmth clings to your sleeves like memory. Your ears are still ringing not from sound, but from silence. The kind of deep, living silence that wraps itself around breath and holds it steady. You walk away from the workshop slowly. No one calls after you. No one needs to. The path down the hill is soft with ash and moss, and the air smells faintly of rosemary, old wood, and something older still. Maybe it's the scent of secrets, or maybe it's just what lingers when so much care is poured into so many small things. The trees around you sway with quiet confidence, and for the first time in a long time, you're not in a rush to fill the space with noise. There's no pressure to explain anything. No need to break the hush. You simply carry it with you. You'll dream of glowing glass, of whispered code, of breath shaped into curve and shimmer and light. And in some corner of your sleep, you might hear it again, that hum, that quiet tone that comes not from a crack, but from creation. A sound made of intention and patience and silence, warmed into being. Let it settle, let it stay. Because even now, long after the fire's gone out, the whisper remains. In the breath, in the shape, in you.